4. A team. That night Andy couldn't go to sleep. First, he couldn't believe he had missed that ball and lost the game. Second, he knew that tomorrow he had to stand up and tell the class his plans for the culture fair. Whenever Andy had to speak to the whole class, he felt as if his throat took a dive and hit somewhere deep in his stomach. "Here's a sorry note," said Dolores as Andy walked through the classroom door. It was in Egyptian hieroglyphics. "Do you want me to read it to you?" asked Dolores. "No," Andy said. He didn't even try to read it. He just stuffed it into his pocket. Later, when the class was painting an enormous map of the continent of Africa, Dolores handed Andy the paintbrush with the blue handle. Everyone in Miss Janice's class knew that the brush with the blue handle was the biggest and the best of all. "No thanks," said Andy. He didn't even look at Dolores when he spoke. When the painting was finished, Miss Janice asked each student to come up to the front of the room and give a report on his or her Culture Day plans. Peter went first. He showed the class pictures of masks from Mali. "I'm going to make a mask," he said. Polly showed the class a mobile she was working on. Hanging from the mobile were pictures of the desert, the forest, the seashore, and a big city. All of these places were in Kenya. "Andy, show us what you've done," said Miss Janice. Andy walked to the front of the room. He began to speak, but realized he had nothing in his hands. Peter had shown something. Polly had shown something. What should he do? I want. Andy paused. I want. "Your mummy," said Dolores. Everyone laughed. Dolores reached into Andy's desk and took out Giraffe Man. She handed him to Andy. "Ooh," the student said. Andy Shane held the mummy action figure, but still looked as if he didn't know what to say. Dolores waved her hands from the back of the room to get his attention. She made her hands go around her neck like a necklace. "I have a necklace," said Andy, "that has a scarab beetle on it. People in ancient Egypt believed that the scarab beetle God pushed the sun across the sky, and—" "Yes, Andy?" said Miss Janice. Dolores made her hands and face look like the Sphinx that Andy had drawn at home. "Oh, I made a picture of a Sphinx," said Andy. "You should see Andy's picture, Miss Janice," said Dolores. "It came out really well." Andy could feel his face getting warmer, but he was happy. He took a big breath and sat down. "Thank you, Andy," said Miss Janice. "Dolores, why don't you come up and tell us about the country you've chosen?" Dolores walked to the front of the room. She pointed to the map the children had painted and said, "I've chosen the tiny, tiny country of Togo, which is—" "No!" shouted Andy. All eyes turned to him. "Andy?" said Miss Janice. Andy stood up. "Dolores and I are going to work together on Egypt." "Really?" asked Dolores. Andy nodded. "Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you, Andy Shane." For a minute, Andy was afraid Dolores was going to hug him, or she was going to strut back and forth, doing her Egyptian dance. Instead, she simply wiggled her toes in her Egyptian sandals and smiled. "Wonderful," said Miss Janice. Andy smiled back. There was no doubt about it. He and Dolores Starbuckle, the Queen of Egypt, would make a great team.